It's Overbooked time.
Okay, so we are jumping into Overbooked with chapter 4, which is Sarah's chapter. We are timeline-wise May 2013, and we are now in London. So Sarah has traveled to London, and she is definitely following someone around. There's some really great descriptions of Sarah basically following John Langford all through London on what she describes as a quote unquote coffee tour, which I kind of love. It was very, very innocent and interesting of her to say that. When she finally catches up with him, they have quite an interesting interaction. She orders the exact same thing that John Langford orders, so that she can literally, quote unquote, accidentally take the coffee that belonged to him in order to start a conversation. Her witty responses to John are quite funny. She's really good at putting him off balance in the scenes and everything. So Sarah's growing on me in this chapter specifically. She has a lot of fun interactions. What about you, Abby? What for that first part of the chapter where they first interact? Do you have any thoughts on that section there?
I agree. I totally picked out the coffee scene, and I thought that is just genius. I loved how that was written and the ensuing conversation that happened. It was just so genius. Yeah, Sarah's chapter uplifted me in general. By the time I got to the end of it and John was on board to help her, I was like, yay! And I was cheering. I like that she's getting things done and making it work. So that's exciting for me.
And we even learn about the pocket watch that comes up a little bit. And we learn that it was given to Patrick with the inscription, quote, "To Patrick, a small token of my grateful esteem, RHL," end quote. So John and Sarah have this chat at the coffee shop. Sarah shows him the pocket watch, or shows him an image of the pocket watch. I'm not sure which one, but he sees the inscription. But before they're able to really dig into that, a bunch of reporters show up. And we learned at the beginning of the chapter why he was disgraced, but apparently John Langford is a disgraced member of parliament. And so as John's leaving the coffee shop, Sarah kind of yells where she's staying, the name of the hotel of where she's staying at John. And I don't think she expects anything from it. But later, John does show up at the hotel bar, which honestly, I was kind of surprised about. I didn't think he was actually going to show up after their interaction. It didn't end all that great. But then he gets there and he's so nice to her, and he actually apologizes for the way he treated her at the coffee shop and how short he was with her and things like that. So I think Sarah appreciated that a lot. And I actually find, and maybe Abby, do you agree with this? I find that Sarah is really coming into her own around John. You know, in her first chapter, I described her as kind of scattered during the book club meeting. But now, when she's around John, she seems really on it. And I don't know if you have the same type of thoughts as well.
Yeah, I agree, EJ. I think Sarah is... Yeah, she's just more, like I said a minute ago, she has more agency, I guess, right now, and she seems to be making moves and doing things like that, which is cool. More confident. She seems more confident right now.
So, any final thoughts on chapter 4 before we move on to chapter 5, Abby?
I don't think so. I think I'm just going to start right on chapter 5, which is Caroline. We're back in New York City, and the date is May 1st, 1915. So there's Robert, who is John's great-grandfather and also Caroline's friend, and then we have another intermingling where we learn right away that Patrick, Sarah's great-grandfather, is Caroline and Gilbert's steward, so he's going to be assigned to their stateroom and he's available for them on their journey. My first impression of chapter 5 was, once again, Gilbert is kind of creeping me out. I'm just not sure what he's doing. He's all concerned about moving quickly and getting the ship going and moving as quickly as possible, and I'm just like, what's the deal, Gilbert? He's carrying that piece of music literally in his coat, and I'm just a little unsure. My first thing that I'd like to discuss is, how does everyone seem to know about this music? Because we meet these two other villains, Prunella and Marjorie Schuyler, and they all we really get from their scene is the vibe I'm getting is that they're trying to catch a glimpse of that music just because everybody seems to know about the music. But I'm interested to know what's the deal with Gilbert and the music and all this.
Yeah, I 100% agree with your vibes on Gilbert. It's just too strange. All the things he's doing and the way he's acting, and yeah, it's just odd. I'm not a fan right now. It's something else I picked up on a couple of times in this chapter is Caroline is reassured again and again that the Lusitania is way too fast for any German U-boats to catch, and again, way too fast for any German torpedo to catch them. I mean, it comes up a lot in this chapter, like at least 3 or 4 times. It comes up from different people in this chapter. And Caroline runs into Robert Langford because Robert Langford is everywhere. He basically rescues her from the conversation with the two Schuyler sister-in-law, their relationship. And Robert and Caroline have this really intimate conversation about why doesn't Caroline have any children with Gilbert? I'm like, this is a lot of really heavy stuff to be talking about, Caroline. While they're together, towards the end of the chapter, Caroline and Robert receive their mail together because why not? And Robert receives this mysterious telegram that he refuses to open, and Caroline also gets something as well. But he's really cagey and weird about the telegram. And so we're not sure what's going on there. But Caroline does urge him to read it, but he's not interested in reading it, at least not in her company. Any final thoughts on chapter 5, Abby?
Yeah, all I'll say, especially in the spirit of recording my observations so that I can eventually be proved right or proved wrong, I found it interesting that I noticed that Caroline and Gilbert are staying portside. They're in rooms B48 and B50, and if we remember back to the mysterious note from page 15, it said, "Meet me B deck, prom, starboard side." And B deck, they're in rooms B. We know also from earlier in the book that there's a torpedo that strikes the ship starboard side while they're on port side. So Patrick, who's their statesman, that was his note. And speaking of notes, you mentioned Robert's note about where we learned maybe him and his father are not on good terms. But let's start at the beginning of chapter 6. We have Tess. She's in New York City. It's May 1st, also 1915. Same date as Caroline, but very different setting. So why don't you start us off, EJ?
Yeah, sure, of course. Okay, so Tess is finally aboard the Lusitania, and yet again, she is looking for her sister Ginny. I am cracking up at all of the times that Tess sees her sister from afar, but then ignores her and does something else. We do hear that Tess sees a red-headed steward, and I am just operating under the assumption that anytime we hear about a red-headed steward, that's Patrick Houlihan. Obviously, Tess doesn't know his name. Having a second-class ticket, she wouldn't know who that is. But what's really interesting is Tess has this, she kind of just ends up near Caroline and Gilbert's stateroom. I think maybe not on accident or maybe on purpose. She's good at sneaking around and doing things. But I'm pretty sure he's the steward that tells her to, quote unquote, move along and that it's not a free show. And she basically says, "Oh, I'm looking for the lifts." And she says it so fast. She says it without missing a beat. And so Tess just always has like a one-liner ready. And then, of course, by chance, she runs into Robert Langford, who, of course, is just hanging out around Caroline's stateroom. And they have some interesting interactions, which I enjoyed. But I'm feeling yet again, Abby, I'm feeling big fairy tale vibes happening in this chapter. There's a lot going on. So, all right, what about, you were talking a little bit about your thoughts on chapter 6 already. So you want to swing back to that, Abby, and what you thought, what was going on there with their interactions?
Yes. Well, what I've said so far is at the end of the chapter when they get the mysterious notes, and I said I wondered if it was from Robert. And it's because of what you're saying. They just have this like electric vibe. One of my favorite quotes from this grouping of chapters is from Tess. So this chapter, and it says this. The quote is Robert having some dialogue with Tess. And in this chapter, she's going by the name Miss Fairweather. So Robert says, "I wouldn't be so sure of that, Miss Fairweather." His voice followed her down the stairs, carrying either a warning or a promise. "Like a bad penny, I tend to turn up." So, I don't know, I just thought that was funny. I think because of, like you said, for one thing, it was well written and interesting. And it's also, he tends to turn up, as we've been saying. So that was, I think, on the tail end of the scene where she decides not to go down the elevator or the lift and goes down the stairs instead. So yeah, there's definitely this chapter. I felt like there were two main things that I was picking up on, and one was her relationship with Robert, her budding relationship, and the other was the brief discussion of this job, that she's avoiding Ginny, but there's also her own internal dialogues of what she's really there to do. And there was a discussion on her forging the music, that's the plan.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of parallels between chapters. The authors are really working hard to kind of set up whatever it is that's going to happen. Okay, so I just wanted to just tag on something else from Tess's chapter. When she gets introduced to her, I guess, bunkmates or whoever she's staying with in her cabin mates, Mary Kate, who has lived her whole life in Brooklyn, actually asked Tess if she had heard the news. And the way the interaction is written is pretty funny, so I'll read some of it out to you. Mary Kate glanced over her shoulder as though the very walls had ears. "The news about the Germans." And Tess responds, "I hear there are a great many of them in Germany." So, Tess is, again, just being sarcastic about stuff that's really important. But in just a couple of lines, we learn that Tess has German heritage. And then that's literally 2 sentences, but it seems like an important thing. But they kind of buried the lead under this news that there are some Germans that were caught on the ship. So I'm really hoping we get some of these mysteries solved pretty soon here. Like, what was that note? What's going on? All these notes that people are getting and not reading. That must be something. Like, they're getting these notes and they're not reading them. It must be something going on there. So I'm hoping that picks up in chapters 7 through 9, which we will be talking about in 2 weeks.